everyone, and welcome back to another very exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. If you are joining us for the first time, which so many of you are today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And as you may know, everything we do goes to our YouTube channel. So if you want to check out this program in like 3 weeks or 3 years, or like 4,000 other past broadcasts, you can head there and do just that. Now, of all the times you're catching us, I'm very excited you're joining us for October, because in October, we have been going all out with space content. We've got a couple astronauts joining us tomorrow. We've had a couple astronauts in the last few weeks. We've got NASA engineers, Canadian Space Agency engineers. We've had everyone and their brother coming on from around the world working to understand the universe around us. And I'm particularly excited, even amidst those luminaries, to bring on Dr. Crawford. Every year, one of the true highlights of my year is having her back. And today, she's going to be talking to us all about Europa Clipper, one of the most exciting and wonderful missions in the world of space right now. And I've got to say, having done this for 11 years, I remember back before Clipper had launched, and all the scientists were like, oh, Europa Clipper, it's going to be the best. And to have seen it come to fruition, where Caitlin gets to be involved in this amazing mission that's going to try and help us understand one of the most unique and special moons in our solar system. I'm just so excited you get to learn about it. So I'm going to stop talking. You're not here for me. Dr. Caitlin, welcome back. So nice to have you back on the show.
So excited to be here, Jesse. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about Clipper. I also selfishly love this moon so much.
It's the best. I know you've got a lot to share with us, so I'm going to zip it and leave you to dive in with your presentation and take us away, and we can learn all about it and pepper you with questions at the end.
That sounds great. Okay, stand by.
Drum roll. We should actually get a big drum. I say drum roll please enough that it would make sense for me to have that. So we'll work on that. Beautiful. All right. We're almost up. Couldn't be better. Let's do it. Take us away.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, guys. I'm so excited to come and talk to you guys about Clipper, about all the work that I do, about all of our lovely atmospheres that we have here at NASA JPL, which is where I'm coming to you live today from. So we're going to talk a little bit about me, the missions that I've worked on a little bit to date, but most of the talk that we're going to talk about today is Europa Clipper. And why are we going there? Why are we going to this moon that's very far away? And then we'll sort of conclude with my journey in STEM and how I got to be where I am. So for those who meet me in person, I'm actually very short. I'm 5 foot flat. So this is me trying so desperately to peer into an astronaut hole at the Texas Museum of History and failing miserably. So I grew up in a really small town in Virginia on the East Coast of the United States. We are most famous for our apples in our cute town of Winchester, Virginia. And then I ultimately went on to get my bachelor's from the University of Virginia, and then got my doctorate in material science with an emphasis of solid state physics to research materials for deep space power. I got that doctorate at the Colorado School of Mines out in Golden, Colorado. And now I'm what we call a flight systems engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory out here in beautiful Pasadena, California, where the weather is seemingly always nice. So I've worked on 2 missions here at NASA JPL, a mission called NISAR and then a mission called Europa Clipper. So we're going to focus on Europa Clipper today, but I was really honored to be able to sit in mission control for both of these launches. So both of the launches have happened in the last calendar year. So it's pretty crazy to be launching 2 spacecraft in the span of a year, but it was a really big dream come true. And most recently, NISAR launched in July of 2025. So that's me sitting in mission control the morning of launch. So before we get into Europa, I just want to give a special shout out to NISAR, because NISAR has this amazing place in my heart because it's the mission I started working on when I joined NASA. It is an Earth observation satellite that's going to track topological changes of the Earth down to a couple of centimeters. So we have this incredible resolution, this huge radar reflector that's going to allow us to sort of see Earth in a new lens and fully map our planet every 6 days. And what's particularly amazing about this particular satellite is that it was in partnership with ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization. So we were back and forth between NASA JPL and ISRO in India, which was an amazing time. And they have such incredible scientists out in India. Okay, and then for Clipper. So NISAR is doing well in space, but like I said, we're going to focus on Clipper today. Clipper is an orbiter that we're sending to Jupiter's moon Europa to detect if life could be possible on this icy moon. Our spacecraft has to travel 1.8 billion miles to answer that question, which is insane. That's so far. So we are obviously here on our beautiful planet of Earth, and then we need to get ourselves all the way to Jupiter. And I will say that in this photo, it makes it look like it's just a hop, skip, and a jump over Mars and through the asteroid belt, and then magically we're at Jupiter. But unfortunately, space is very large. So it takes us a long time to be able to get there. But when we get there, we're going to do observations of this beautiful moon, Europa. And so we call our spacecraft Clipper going off to Europa. Okay. But so why are we interested in this moon of Jupiter? What's going on here? Why are we sending this orbiter to this moon? Okay, I think in order to answer that question, we sort of have to really ask ourselves a lot of questions of the moon itself and understand the characteristic properties of that moon. So there are 4 Galilean, what we call satellites of Jupiter. They are 4 different moons of Jupiter. That is Callisto, Ganymede, Europa, and Io. Callisto is the one that's furthest away from Jupiter, and it's full of all of these different craters. You can see that it has a bunch of beautiful craters on it. Ganymede still has a bunch of craters and potentially some tectonic activity. And then there's Europa, the one that we're most excited about, which has a relatively what we call like new surface. There's minimal craters on the surface of Europa, and it seems relatively smooth-ish. And then Io, pesky Io. I love this moon as a sidebar. We're not taking measurements of Io, but Io is the most volcanically active entity in our solar system. So Io is just spewing out charged particles from its surface, and then Jupiter's magnetic field grabs those charged particles and whips them around, which creates a crazy high radiation environment in this network of this planetary body. Now, why do we call them satellites if they're moons? So we'll see these cute little pictures here. These moons were actually discovered by Galileo in the 1600s, and they were the first bodies that were reported to orbit another body. And at one point in time in the 1600s, they were purely just these beautiful drawings that Galileo had made around Jupiter here. And so they sort of modeled satellite-esque behavior. And now, of course, in the modern age, we have these stunning pictures of all of the different moons based off of different spacecraft that we have sent out into space. Okay, so Europa's surface. I said it was relatively new. Well, what does that mean? Because things in space are very old. So how can the surface be new? If we look at the surface of Europa, we have a bunch of geological features that we as scientists and engineers are very interested in. One of the most notable ones are their ridged plains. So you can see these long lines across Europa itself that span hundreds of kilometers, and they're almost like canyons etched into the surface of Europa. And then we have something called a chaos terrain. So if you look even closer outside of these ridge lines, we can see that there is this network of terrain that has seemingly refroze, reshifted, tilted, found some rotation. It looks like there's activity, much like when you sort of take an ice cube and you thaw it out a little bit and then you refreeze it and it's going through these refreezing cycles. We think that's akin to what is happening in this chaos terrain and on the surface of Europa. Now, one thing, and this is why we sort of say that it's not it's a relatively new surface, is that there's very minimal craters on the surface of Europa. You can see this one down here, which is zoomed in here. When, much like our moon, when we look up to the night sky, has a bunch of craters on it. Right? It is getting bombarded with things from space, much because it doesn't have a very active network of things to heal the surface, if you will. There's not an atmosphere to protect that particular moon. So Europa is really interesting because it is also an older body in our solar system. So you would think, because it's just hanging out in space, that it would have a lot of craters. And it should, similar to that of Callisto, right? We said that the furthest moon away had a bunch of craters. But what that tells scientists is that maybe there are craters that form on Europa's surface, but because there's a bunch of activity across the surface, maybe those craters get smoothed over in this sort of freezing, unfreezing action. Then we have the last feature that we're interested in, which is called lenticulae. Lenticulae is this sort of indication that there might be some subsurface activity that's coming and sort of healing the surface of this beautiful moon that we have, Europa. So if we were to sort of crack open Europa, what would it look like? So we have what we think is an icy crust on the surface of Europa. The last time that we were able to have insight into this moon was when we launched the Galileo satellite, aptly named because he discovered it, in the 1990s. From those satellites, we were able to investigate what we think is the structure of this moon, where we think that there's an icy crust about 100 kilometers deep. And given all of these nice, interesting features that we talked about on the moon, we suspect that there is a subsurface liquid ocean underneath that icy crust. And then we have a metallic core and sort of rock mantle similar to that of Earth. So we have this sort of icy shell and this thick core, and then a bunch of potential water underneath. Now, here's the really cool thing. Where there's water on Earth, there tends to be life. And we have a lot of life and we have a lot of water. It's something that makes our beautiful planet so unique. And we know that there is life here on Earth. We've spent a lot of time, and for good reason, investigating Mars to try to see past conditions for life. But if and when we find that, it's likely going to be fossilized life. But Europa maybe has the right conditions to have present life. And the really cool thing, Europa is about the size of our moon, which is much smaller than Earth. But all of Europa's suspected water that we have would be 2 times the amount of water that we have on Earth. So it's a massive amount of water underneath this icy crust that seems to have a lot of planetary action and interesting ebbs and flows to it. So maybe it could, in fact, hold life as we know it. Now, one of the really cool things about the orbit of Europa around Jupiter itself is something called tidal flexing. Now, Europa, when it orbits Jupiter, it's not a perfect concentric circle. So if we play this one ever so slightly again, what it means is that Europa itself is stretching and compressing as it goes around Jupiter. It's sort of ebbing and flowing, stretching back and forth, almost like a rubber band if you were to pull it back and forth a bunch. And similar to a rubber band, if you were to take one of those in your hand and stretch it a bunch, when you do this compression and pushing and pulling of a rubber band, it heats up that rubber band because there's a bunch of energy that it takes to do that stretching. And so as a result, same thing is happening here with Europa. It's orbiting this massive body of Jupiter and it's getting pushed and pulled, which introduces a lot of energy into our system. And energy is also another thing that we need for life to occur, right? Much like we take energy from the sun, we need energy on Europa to give us this heating element to allow us to have that subsurface liquid ocean. Because we have this really icy crust around that surface, space is, of course, really cold, and Europa and Jupiter are very far away from the sun, which is why we have that icy shell. But it's this tidal heating, that push and pull, that allows us to potentially have that liquid ocean underneath the surface of Earth, underneath the surface of the ice. Now, we just said that there's potentially much more water underneath this icy crust than there is on Earth. So could that have the harboring signs of life? When we look for signs of life outside of our planet, outside of Earth, we look for the building blocks, the sort of chemical elements of life as we know it. And those things are what we call SNOPs. So it's sulfur, nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, phosphorus, and hydrogen. And from previous investigations of Europa, we think that the building blocks of life in that elemental structure are present in Europa. All right, so we've talked about tidal heating. We've talked about elements. There's some other things that make it interesting too. Like there's a lot of chemical energy from above and a bunch of stability. So we think radiation is coming in and bombarding our surface. And maybe as a byproduct of that or the tidal flexing, we think that there are hydrothermal plumes sort of erupting from the mantle through that icy crust and sort of ejecting out, which means, again, this is another source of energy. And where there's energy, there could be life. So this makes the moon super exciting. We're like, wow, all of these things are happening. It seems so fascinating. What can we do about it? You know, us sending Galileo in the 1990s did a really good preliminary investigation, but we really want to see what this moon is about. So NASA got together and said, let's send an orbiter to this moon of Europa. So that's where Clipper comes in. We have this amazing scientific objective to explore Europa and investigate its habitability, saying, could this place hold life? We're going to investigate the icy shell in the ocean, the composition of the surface, and think about, those ridges and the craters and what does the structure really look like, and map out the moon even more, the geology, the activity. Again, that's that tidal flexing that we said. And then take some beautiful photos to try to see down into that moon structure. Now, in order to do this, Europa has a suite of scientific instruments. We have remote sensing instruments, and then we call in situ instruments. So our remote sensing instruments are the 5 that we have listed: UVS, ICE, MISE, ETHEMIS, and REASON. So they're going to do things like take pictures, understand the atmosphere, try to figure out the landscape, take chemical fingerprints of the surface, understand the temperature imaging of the moon, and then understand how deep in each of those different areas using radar is the icy crust of the surface. And then we have the in situ instruments. In situ means we're sort of actively collecting measurements, either by collecting dust particles through SUDA. Maybe as we sweep through Europa, we're able to capture some dust that are being ejected from the hydrothermal plumes that we've hypothesized are there. Maybe we can understand the atmospheric composition by actively collecting samples, again, as we fly by. We're going to understand the ocean properties that exist underneath that surface, take some plasma measurements, and then understand that tidal flexing by understanding the gravity and radio science element. So it's this beautiful suite of instruments on this insanely large spacecraft. So Europa Clipper itself is powered by solar panels. These solar panels have to be so big because, again, we are really far away from the sun when we are sending this spacecraft all the way to Europa. So we have these massive solar array panels that are 100 feet tip to tip when they're deployed. So Europa Clipper itself is almost as big as a basketball field. If you were to go watch the Lakers, with all of the arrays all the way pushed out, it would span almost the exact size of an NBA basketball field, which is bananas big. And then we have our suite of instruments on the main body of our spacecraft. And then there's this big old boom that comes out, and that's where our magnetometer sits. That's because that when we take measurements with instruments, they can create sort of electronic noise, and magnetometers are really sensitive to that. And we want to make sure that that is really far away from those instruments so we can take the best possible data of Europa itself without any interference of the 9 other instruments that we have. All right. Now, we have this beautiful view of our spacecraft. It's, again, so large. This is a 3D version of it. This little guy right here is what we call our high gain antenna, and that allows us to be able to talk from the spacecraft all the way back to Earth. So it's allowing us to be able to communicate that really far distance where we can shout back out at space and say, hey, Clipper, can you turn right? And it'll say, I gotcha. And then that sort of communicates back and forth. So the goal of our spacecraft is to determine habitability of Europa's subsurface ocean. And we have all of these beautiful instruments that we just talked about on the main body of that spacecraft. All right. Now, these really cool looking instruments that come and hang out with us. Now, the really tricky thing is that Jupiter has a really large magnetic field. And remember that moon that I talked about, Io, pesky little Io. I think maybe one of my favorite moons. That moon is spewing these charged particles off of its surface. And then the magnetic field of Jupiter is grabbing those charged particles and says, thank you so much. And it whips them across its entity. And that creates a really high radiation environment. Now, it's really tough because radiation and electronics don't mix super well. Radiation does some pretty weird things to electronics. So we have to make sure that we are protecting our spacecraft when we send it into the heart of Europa, because the radiation is particularly bad around Europa, which is very unfortunate for us because we need to make sure that we are protecting that spacecraft to the best of our ability. Now, in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to send the spacecraft to orbit Jupiter, actually, and not Europa, and that we are going to sweep by Europa in what we call a flyby. So we will sweep by Europa nearly 50 times at a low altitude over the course of 3.5 years to take a full measurement of the entire moon. We then go back into orbit with Jupiter, we hang out for a little bit, we sweep by through another flyby. And this allows us to protect ourselves from the radiation environment that surrounds Europa itself. That isn't to say that we're still not seeing radiation at Jupiter. Of course we are, but this will help minimize the impact of degradation that we're going to see in the electronic suite of the instruments around this entity. Okay, now, like I mentioned, the size of Europa is massive. A NASA LS rocket is about yay big. For reference, the Statue of Liberty is a little bit smaller, so that's a huge rocket. If you were to take 6 stacked school buses, that is about the height of the Statue of Liberty, which is almost equivalent to a SpaceX Falcon Heavy, which is the rocket that we launched with in October, and then Europa Clipper. And you might be thinking, wow, that looks so small compared to a rocket. Well, remember, that's a basketball court. So it's this massive instrument, spacecraft that we're sending. In reference to how big only half of the solar panels are, here's our solar panels getting built up at Airbus in the Netherlands, where they're massive, massive solar panels, again, 100 feet almost in length for when one of these are deployed. So much so that you need a crane, a little lift, in order for the solar panels to be looked at the very top. Now, Europa Clipper is a beautiful instrument that was built here in-house at NASA JPL. It went and undervac a successful thermal vac chamber at JPL. So we can see, again, here are some humans for reference. This is the main body of the spacecraft without those solar panels deployed. And this is when we were doing our final test and assembly at the clean room at JPL. Now, we launched back in October of 2024. So we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary on the 14th. We had a little bit of a launch delay because when we tried to launch, there was actually an active hurricane that was happening in Florida. So we waited out the hurricane before we launched, and we launched in October. Now, remember, I said it was going to take 1.8 billion miles to get to Jupiter, and it takes about 5 years to get there, right? Space is really, really, really big. So we launched in October, and our clever navigation team and trajectory team came up with this really beautiful way for us to get to Jupiter with the least amount of energy possible. So around February of this year, we flew by Mars. So we were able to take a couple of different images of Mars on our way, and we used the gravity around Mars to slingshot us back. And we're actually headed back to Earth, and we will come back into near Earth's orbit in December of next year. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to slingshot around Earth, and then we're going to finally make our way to Jupiter. And it's these slingshots of Mars and Earth that allow us to get to Jupiter as fast as that we are getting. We feel very lucky that we're getting there in 5 years, which is a really crazy sentence. You're like, 5 years, that's so long. But it's because of this clever design of this trajectory that allows us to get there so fast. Okay. So I want to show you guys the launch video.
Live at NASA's Kennedy Space Center for NASA's Europa Clipper mission, a nearly 2 billion mile, 5.5-year journey to Jupiter's icy ocean moon.
And liftoff. Liftoff. Falcon Heavy with Europa Clipper, unveiling the mysteries of an enormous ocean lurking beneath the icy crust of Jupiter's moon, Europa.
Side booster separation confirmed.
Fairing is separated, and those will be recovered by SpaceX's own recovery ship, Go Cosmos.
This is a big moment for the program, for NASA, APL, and JPL. Let's watch.
Europa Clipper separation confirmed.
And there you go. NASA's Europa Clipper probe, embarking on a long-awaited mission to study Jupiter's icy moon, Europa. And what a sight.
Now they wait for acquisition of signal.
I believe we have it. Right. There it is. Confirmation of signal from the spacecraft, Europa Clipper.
It was an absolute incredible launch, and it went so swimmingly. It was an absolute dream come true to be in mission control for launch. It was sort of my dream since I can remember for that to happen. But I will say what made it even better is that we had such a stellar team to get us to this point. At the time of launch, I was working what we call DDM, or downlink and data management, which is how we talk to the spacecraft. How are we going to communicate with the spacecraft? How are we going to get the data down from the spacecraft? That was my whole job leading up to launch and around launch. And this is our beautiful DDM team. And we had such a tight network of people to help us be able to get to this point. It doesn't just take one person to launch a spacecraft. It's your teammates, your friends, your teachers that make solving really hard problems even more enjoyable. Okay, so it's going to take us 5 years to get there, which is a long time. So what have I been doing since launch? When we launch a spacecraft, we don't just launch it and say, oh, we will get there eventually. There's a bunch of activities that have to happen. We're making sure that the instrument's okay. We're getting ready for those maneuvers around Mars and around Earth. Since launch, I've become one of the flight directors for Europa, which means that I get to lead mission control in operating our spacecraft. So it's akin to saying I get to be the person to answer the question of like, Houston, I think that we have a problem, and I'm Houston. In this case, I am at JPL. I am not at Houston. But that is sort of the analogy of making sure that we are flying the spacecraft in the way that we want, and helping the team decide how are we going to operate the spacecraft today and the activities that we're going to do. So our spacecraft is doing amazing in space. It is a beautiful spacecraft that is just been, knock on wood, executing all of the things that we've been asking it to do leading up to our Jupiter insertion. So we will see you guys in 4 to 5 years, and I can't wait to tell you about all the incredible science that it is going to collect. Okay, we're going to end with just a quick thing about my path in STEM and sort of wrap it up. So like I mentioned, I grew up in Winchester, Virginia, where we have a big Shenandoah Apple Blossom Festival, and the Appalachian Trail runs through our town. I went on to get my Bachelor's of Science at the University of Virginia in aerospace engineering. A little fun fact, I actually started going to school for studio art and realized about 1 year in to college where I was like, I think engineering is a perfect blend of science and art. And I will live to tell that tale. Like, I think that is true even to this day, that you can be so creative as an engineer. And so ultimately I switched from art to aerospace engineering. And then I went on to get my doctorate I wrapped that up in 2021 in material science at the Colorado School of Mines. And I was actually back and forth between NASA JPL and Colorado for my doctorate degree, working alongside of engineers at NASA trying to create better materials for what we call radioisotope thermoelectric generators, which is a mouthful, which is how we power the Martian rovers. So through that, I ended up becoming a flight systems engineer here at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, first starting on the NISAR mission, but now am full-time on Europa Clipper, which has been really fun. So some advice to end the talk with. There's 4 pieces of advice that I'd like to leave you with, which is 1, there can be a lot of failure in science, and I mean a lot. I think I failed general chemistry when I first went to college, and that's okay. It doesn't define you. It doesn't make you, bad at something. As long as you pick yourself up and try again, then that's absolutely the best way to do it. 2, I think that there's a misconception that if you're a scientist or an engineer, you're going to be stuck behind a microscope or you're going to be stuck in a room crunching numbers. And that is the furthest thing from true. My job has taken me all over the world. I've been scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef, or I went to Paris for a conference, got to go skydiving in Australia, like just so many different things that being a scientist and an engineer can help facilitate. And I just love it so much. 3, you are your biggest advocate. There are mentors that you will find that will help you along the way, though. And much like the teachers that are potentially in the room with you now, and these people are priceless. While you are advocating for yourself, they can help you and give you such good advice for where you potentially want to go in the future. And then lastly, 4, sort of similar to number 2, your job doesn't necessarily have to define who you are. I spend so much of my time painting and cooking and traveling and backpacking and seeing the world and talking with all of you that I love my job, and it's so, so important to me, but it's not the only thing about my life. And I just really think that if you go into STEM, there's so many different things that you can still explore. So thank you guys for listening to Europa and spending time with me today. I hope in 4 to 5 years, we have the most incredible science to report. And with that, Jesse, I'm going to return back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kaylin. My goodness, it's so fun every time. Even when it's stuff I've heard before, it's just endlessly thrilling. It's such a cool mission. I can't wait for it to come to fruition and in the next few years. And when we get there and just get to see it all and learn all these amazing things, it's going to be wild. So thank you for that deep dive. Also, the phrase chaos terrain is something that I want as a sci-fi book title. It just sounds so awesome. We're going to dive in with questions, as you well know. So any of our YouTubers, please do share in the chat. We'd love to hear from you over the minutes to come. We've got one to begin, which is what will happen to the spacecraft when it's done? So like when it's over, does it just keep spinning around, or tell us a little more?
Amazing question. Such a good question. So we actually have a division here at JPL called planetary protection. And it's something that we think about all the time because we're on this sort of hunt for, could there be life? Could there be signs of life? And so we want to make sure that when we go to these really cool places like Mars and Europa, that at the end of these missions, that we sort of exit with grace and with consideration to the moon itself, or that there could be life. And so as a result, we don't want to take this spacecraft and crash landed into Europa, let's say, because if we were then to find life in the future, who's to say we didn't put it there? So we make sure that the Clipper itself will be far away from Europa at the end of its mission. It can't sustain an orbit just orbiting perpetually. So we will either crash land it into Jupiter or Ganymede, but depending on where we are in that trajectory.
Very, very cool. We've talked about this with a lot of our Mars engineer folks as well. Like, we really take a lot of effort to make sure that, again, in the future, if we find a bunch of bacteria, they're not Earth bacteria, but things can survive on the outside of spacecraft. We know this from other missions, and that would be one of the world's worst, like, oh, amazing science headline. Oh, it's all wrong. We don't want to have to take that. Yeah. Speaking of the water and sort of the potential for life underneath the ice, is there a place that in a future mission we could go and get in the water? Are we trying to melt through the ice? Are we going into one of these sort of geysers? What's going on?
Oh man, also a good question. You guys are great questions today. So there actually was an initial proposal to do what we called Europa Lander. So our spacecraft, like we just said, is orbiting Europa, but there was a world where we could have potentially landed something on the surface to collect samples of the actual surface to send information back. We wouldn't send samples back, that's too far. But we instead went with an orbiter. So there is a world where if we get good data from Clipper, we could send a secondary mission based off of what we find. That could potentially be a lander and potentially be trying to drill into the surface of the ice. I will say that the ice is very thick, right? It's 100 kilometers. So it is really hard for us to potentially be able to get all the way in there. One of the really cool things would be if there are hydrothermal flumes that are erupting off of the surface, maybe if we're really clever in the future, there's a way we could send something down through a hydrothermal plume, but we would still probably want some capability to be able to drill or get down into the water. So it's going to take a really incredible feat of engineering for us to be able to do it. But the engineers at NASA are already thinking about it. And so fingers crossed, I know that there's some really cool robotics work coming out of JPL to help solve this problem in the future.
So I want to just put it into the context for some of our kids that when we've tried to burrow into the earth, like go down with our mining equipment, it's nowhere near 100 kilometers we've gotten. So this is like a huge challenge. It's very different than anything we will have ever done before. But again, we're also sending spacecraft to go explore other worlds and land in them in the case of Mars and send the helicopters from those things. So it's truly wild. If anyone can do it, JPL can, but it's not going to be easy. And I love this question.
And I will say one of the extra hard things about it too, okay, let's say we can get down there, but then how do we talk with our spacecraft? Because there's this huge amount of stuff in the way. And from a downlink and data communication perspective with Earth, we want to collect that science. But if we can't talk to the spacecraft that's under 100 kilometers of ice, that might be hard. So there's not only like, how do we get down there, but then also how do we talk to it once it's there? But I have full faith in NASA engineers to make it happen.
Future missions. You kids might be, you might be in a situation where you're either certainly watching this on television or maybe getting to be involved because you got inspired by Dr. Caitlin. I mean, there's lots of options here. I hope we get those missions in the future. I'd love to see it personally. Very, very exciting stuff. We've got a question which we get more and more nowadays with space programs. How much did it cost? Europa Clipper, what's the deal? What's the bill?
It cost about $5 billion. So that's with everything. That's labor. That's the rocket. It is a lot of money, of course. But we are really optimistic that money went to good use for positive public science for Europa.
I love when we get this question because it's a big question and the numbers do sound huge, but it's the total budget for NASA is about 0.4 of 1 penny on the dollar. So 0.4% of the US budget, which is the largest budget in the history of the world for any country ever, goes towards space exploration. And for that, we get pictures from the James Webb Space Telescope. We get Mars robots. We get astronauts on the moon, astronauts going back to the moon this next year coming. I mean, there's some of the great developments in understanding ourselves, our place in the universe, and the universe around us have come from a very small percentage of that. And we spend more than that on bubblegum every year. Right? So it does sound like a lot, but it's peanuts in the scheme of things. And we found throughout history that the more societies invest in understanding science, technology, engineering, and math, the more everybody reaps the rewards from that. So I love this question. Thanks, guys. Geez. Caitlin, time flies when you're having fun. We're at the 40-minute mark already. Wow. I want to stress for kids that wanted to be you, is there a place that you'd send them to go learn more? Is there a resource you'd have them check out? Is there something you'd have them take in university, anything to inspire our classes that might want to turn into you?
You know what? That's such a fun question. It's also, wow, what an honor. So I will say, NASA itself doesn't just need engineers. So if you're like, oh man, I really don't like math, that's okay, because we hire lawyers, we hire artists, we hire all types of jobs, because NASA needs all those people to make amazing things happen. But if you do happen to be really excited about math or engineering and science, I would say the best possible thing that you can do is really just try to learn as much as you can, whether that is through going to the public library, whether that is going to college. I really benefited from aerospace engineering, but I know a lot of my colleagues here, they didn't do aerospace. They did chemistry or mechanical engineering or any type of STEM field. But has really helped us is actually just talking with a bunch of engineers. So if you can find an engineer in your life and be like, how did you get here? And that person can sort of help you navigate. That's what made the biggest impact in my life, is just going to people and being like, hi, I want to be you. How do I be you? And they'd be like, let me help you. And that was just like a huge win. So find those mentors, find people to talk to. And that is just will help so much.
No better message than that. Caitlin, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, your passion. I know it's early there out in California, so we really appreciate you joining us as part of our Epic Space Month. I really encourage all our classes, if you want to see more programs from Caitlin, they're on our YouTube channel. Check out nasa.gov. It's like literally the greatest website from a science agency in the world for all sorts of education, everything you could want to know and more. And you can always email us at exploringbytheseatofyourpants, and we'll pass along all sorts of cool stuff to keep the learning going. As always, we'll wrap up by saying a big thank you and farewell. Everyone's on YouTube today, so if you're at home and you want to scream and yell and annoy the principal, you have our permission. Please do that. But we'll say a big farewell for now. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful